Up. Technical difficulties. Let me get rid of this.
Gina, people can, I hope people can hear us.
Yeah, I hope so as well. Great. Well, good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us in our final Leadership Empowerment Series. We're very excited to be here today and spend some time with you. We will be going over what most people consider to be diversity, equity, and inclusion, but we're here to tell you there might be something more that's missing in your DE&I program. Let me introduce to you, in our final session of our Leadership Empowerment Series, Inspiration, Innovation, and Inclusivity, we're going to have a featured DEI strategist, Keisha Winters, here with us today, who will be sharing her wisdom from her impressive career working with Fortune 100 organizations to integrate a diversity mindset into their businesses and people strategies. The topics that we'll be including in our discussion today is uncovering the systematic problems with the current thinking about diversity, evaluating your current DEI program and determining if you are really making any progress at all, and then learning the 5 keys to shaping an inclusive organizational culture. But first, let me share a little bit more about Miss Keisha Winter. She's a leadership development consultant and DEI strategist with more than 20 years of corporate experience. Keisha works with executives and teams in more than 50 countries to create inclusive cultures with effective leaders so that their best talent thrives. Past clients of hers have included GE, Baker Hughes, Twilio, Concordia College, and many others. Keisha, this is not my first time spending time with you, but I am thrilled to be here on a Monday morning with you and looking forward to our conversation. Please help us better understand DE&I and how this other angle of looking at this affirmative action in our world can really make a difference.
This is great. Thank you for that great introduction, Susan. I'm so happy to be here. And I would love to hear, I saw Jessica typed in the chat that she can hear us. And first of all, I want to make this interactive. I'm going to be talking and I can talk for 30 minutes, but I want to see if there are any questions that come up from people as we get towards the end. But if you can type in the chat, I'm here, or hey, or something, just to let us know that you're with us. And obviously we're going to take questions if there are questions towards the end. So I'm excited to be here. As you gave this background on me, I've been thinking a lot about all the work that I've done with organizations around diversity, equity, and inclusion. And, first of all, I want to start that it is, it's important for me, not just as a business person and as well as when I was an employee and now as a consultant, but living in a country where, and in a world where the borders are really, coming down, and understanding that what makes our companies have this outstanding competitive advantage is really tied back to the ability to use diversity, not as looking at checking the box in this compliance thing, but leveraging the difference as a true competitive advantage. Think about working in a corporation where you're launching a product or you're going to market, and having a more diverse team to really understand the market that you're operating into, to speak the various languages of your customers. It's going to set you apart from an organization that's much more homogenous. And so I think it's, obviously important from a business standpoint, what I just spoke about, but even from like a personal standpoint, as myself, as an immigrant to the US, it's something that runs through my bones as well. So I'm excited to be here and to share and to go through this topic with you today. So I think the first thing you said you wanted to talk about, Susan, was around, if you want to state the question again, but the problem with the current diversity, thinking around diversity and inclusion.
Yeah, if we think about going back to when affirmative action first came into place, 1961. Yes, that means President Kennedy. How long ago was that? Right? I wasn't even born. And
yes, neither me.
And think about it, it's like the progress I mean, anything compared to technology, the progress is slow, right? But it's
Right.
still progress of this, caring for our own humankind. We have not made the progress that I mean, granted, we've done a lot in the last year or so, but
Yes.
it's something that needs attention. And
Yeah.
obviously putting these nice programs in place and looking at putting that big binder up on the shelf and pulling it out once every year and checking to see what our numbers are, you know, when we think about an AAP or affirmative action program, it doesn't necessarily drive the numbers and what's missing.
Yeah. I mean, I love that you took it all the way back, Susan. She went all the way. I wasn't even going to take it that far back. But yes, you're absolutely right. I mean, as someone like you with the HR background, you know the history and the historical context. We all know the historical context on why this came about from affirmative action in the civil rights era is what I call it in the 1960s. Here's the challenge with organizations. You know, there has been a lot of work that's happened in this space over the last 5-6 decades, right? That's what we're talking about at this point in time. And the reality is that I'm going to talk more about this as we go through this conversation today, that really there is a maturity model, right, in terms of diversity and how you start out from like this performative compliant, because that's what you're talking about, right? This performative is what I call it. Level one is this performative methodology where you look at just being compliant, making sure that the EEOC doesn't come after you, you know, checking the box from a diversity standpoint. And so some of the characteristics I would say of a lot of organizations, and it's changing now ever since 2020 with the George Floyd case and that situation, there's been a lot more nuanced conversations and people are becoming a lot more aware that it takes more than just checking the box. So doing things like in the past, we just talked about, yes, we want to have a diverse workforce, but then you look at the C-suite and it's still homogenous. There are very few women, there are pretty much zero people of color. And some of the things that they focused on were just, let's do unconscious. So I'm going to call out some organizations now. If you want to see like this, and even though we're going to go into like some of the more progressive things that can be done, if your organization still looks homogenous, there's not diversity in terms of gender and or people of color from a race standpoint, and let's not even begin talking about other types of diversity from sexual orientation to socioeconomic to cultural to neurodiversity. That's even like getting at the advanced stages, but like from these basic stages that we're talking about, if the numbers are not there, you already know that you're not making the progress that you want. And the mindset, you know, from that era is just about being compliant, just about not breaking the law. And what organizations at this level tend to do, in addition to making sure they're compliant, obviously with the law, is that they're establishing employee resource groups. And when I mean by employee resource group, it's the Women's Network group, it's the Hispanic Network group, it's the African American or the Black employee group, the Asian American group, the Native American, the GLBTQ. And they have these affinity groups for employees. Yet the affinity groups, they're doing a lot of activities, but they're not able to drive transformation and change in the organization because they don't have this decision-making authority, because they're not in the senior leadership suite, they're not in the C-suite. So they're doing a lot of activities, which is important, but they're not really empowered to drive change. And those organizations, they focus on that. They focus on unconscious bias trainings, which is so popular, which is important, but we have to build on those things to drive true transformation. So I love how you brought that up.
Well, and one of the things that you mentioned, Keisha, was checking the box, right? And there are so many boxes. There's the age box, there's the race box, the ethnicity box, the disability box, the boxes continue. And while we have to keep those boxes in their swim lane, I'm so excited about the boxes you're also going to talk about today.
Yeah. And I want to add, like, if you think about it, because sometimes you say, and the way in which I was using it, I was intentionally using checking the box because it's like this minimal thing. But if you think about us as individuals, right, as human beings, how many boxes we're such, there's I don't know if you've ever heard this term called intersectionality, which basically means there are multiple aspects of who you are that comes into play, right, Susan? So as, you know, an individual, an employee, a wife, a mom, like these are all different aspects of and they're all important. And how do you bring this conversation to not just checking this box, but allowing people as individuals, us, employees, to bring their full self to work so that they can be effective and bring the most innovation, that's one of our eyes, to an organization, right? And so it's getting out of this box mindset. Let's break out of the box. Let's rip the boxes down and let's really step up and allow ourselves to bring all of who we are to work so that we can, you know, bring out our full potential as individuals. We can perform at our highest levels, and even more importantly, bring the most value to the organization so that the organization itself can be competitive and relevant in the marketplace.
I love ripping the box apart. Let's turn it into a multi-box, right? An octagon, multi-box.
Yeah. And then one of the points, the other point, so we talked about the boxes and tying it back to that affirmative action and just being compliant. The second thing that's a challenge with our current thinking about diversity is that building a diverse work culture, I from the studies and what I've seen in working with organizations, it's truly a mindset shift. It really is that building an inclusive workforce is not a separate DEI thing. Inclusivity is a basic leadership trait, right? We create roles such as chief diversity officer. We have these terms called DEI, but the reality is that when we build an inclusive culture where every voice is heard, where vulnerability, Brené Brown talks about vulnerability in leadership, is modeled, where there is psychological safety. As a matter of fact, psychological safety has to precede the vulnerability, where there's a commitment to listen to the lived experiences of others, when there's a commitment to admit that you're wrong, and that leaders are humble enough and have a level of humility to admit they're wrong and they're championing others. Eventually, honestly, DEI won't even have to be such a focus because you are actually creating an environment where the best talent can thrive, regardless of their background. So it's not just about, oh, let's make DEI this special thing. No, if you're building a culture that's truly inclusive, DEI is an automatic outcome of that. And the challenge is, we are not raising the bar in terms of what is expected from a leadership standpoint. And then, the DEI portion of it is called out and it tends to suffer. But frankly, especially in this COVID-19 post-pandemic era, where leaders are having to deal with so much because their employees are dealing with death, their employees are dealing with so many things that are traumatic, it actually is requiring leaders to be more agile, more emotionally intelligent, to stretch themselves. And as you're able, frankly, if you're not able to do those things as a leader, like even taking DEI aside, you frankly are not going to survive, or your company is not going to survive in this space. And so I say that's the second problem with it. It's just really, it's not separating. It's truly an important leadership competence to have, is inclusivity.
I love that. I love that. That's so true. So very, very true. We often find, managers not willing to step up and be their authentic self or own their space and be accountable to their word. And they just really run through the motions. I know my husband is just taking on a new assignment at work, and I'm like, he's telling me stories. I'm like, okay, but you needed to stop and hear what they were really saying. What was behind that? Well, I wrote down their notes. No, did you ask the questions behind the question? Right.
I love how you say that. I just wanted to point out this. This is like, it goes back to my point on true leadership trait, and what you're pointing to is emotional intelligence, but specifically having this higher ability to listen, not just listen to the information that is being given, but listening to what's not being said. In the coaching world, we call it level 3 listening. It's listening for the emotions and the feelings behind what's being said, and actually being able to acknowledge that and bring that into the conversation.
Yeah.
Great leaders are able to do that. So I love how you're giving that coaching to your husband.
Don't tell him.
But hey, like if you're able to actually think about talking to a customer or a client and hearing the frustration in their voice, and actually putting aside like the sale and saying, okay, I'm hearing you frustrated. Like, tell me what's going on. What's making you, frustrated? And opening up that level of conversation. Can you imagine the level of vulnerability, the level of psychological safety that you're creating to allow a person to really express what's going on beneath the surface, and then not putting shame on it? Yeah. And so that goes to my third and last point. And then I want to see if there's any other questions out there. But the third and last point around the current problem thinking with diversity is that diversity is often an agenda that's pushed based on guilt, based on shame, rather than the words that we use in this session were around inspiration and innovation. And what was the third I? I forgot the third I.
Inclusivity.
And inclusive. Yeah, I should remember the inclusivity, right? We just talked about inclusivity. So innovation, inspiration, and inclusivity, right? And that's what we want to push it at. But a lot of these diversity discussions, it's really focused around I call it a lower level of consciousness on guilt and shame, rather than calling people to their higher self and challenging them. And I love how you kind of pointed out just now the levels of listening, because as a leader, you have to be a coach. And as coaches, what we do is we do dive into the hard things. I'm not here to sugarcoat and say that the topic of diversity can't be a challenging one, because it does require us to have tough conversations. It does require us to hold space for fear, sometimes even feelings of despair and hopelessness, especially for people that have been working in the equity space for a long time, without bringing, politics or anything like that. But like a lot of the broader conversations, even the George Floyd thing that happened, for people that have been working in this space for 30, 40 years, you can't tell me they don't go through feelings of hopelessness and despair sometimes, especially if you've been working on this for 50, 60 years, right? But, as leaders with this higher level of emotional intelligence, we don't step over or suppress or ignore the pain and the trauma caused by operating really in a workforce where there is like a foundation of systemic racism, there is toxic patriarchy, like it's all there, right? Yet we don't operate from that place. Where we're operating from is that even though we're willing to look at the challenging situation, we are willing to step into this energy of courage, that we're drawing a line in the sand. We're going to call people to, a place of a higher place, where we're calling people to transformation. We're calling leaders to transformation. Instead of leaning into fear, we're leaning into engagement. We're leaning into the innovation. What can we do? What are some creative things that we can do in our work environment, in our culture, to create this space where everybody feels like they belong and they can bring their best self to work? And so that's the third thing. Sorry, and I'll let you go.
No, I was just going to say, go ahead.
Yeah, it's not coming from shame and guilt and like, always talking about like, white people owe us this or Black people are this. Like it's actually, let's have a higher level. Let's acknowledge the pain and create programs around healing of trauma, right? That's some of the work I do in coaching for women in particular and women of color. It's doing the work around healing trauma because that's important. But you don't drive change from guilt and shame. You drive change from inspiration and innovation and calling people to a higher level of consciousness. So Susan, what were you going to say?
I was just going to say, I think very often my experience has been people are uncomfortable to even have that conversation with the ones that may come across as being hopeless and, disappointed in what their opportunities have passed them by. Instead of just saying, well, that's their problem, I'm not going to deal with it, stepping into it and saying, hey, I see that you're really disappointed that that didn't go your way. Do you want to talk about it? And helping them through their own hopelessness of where they are. That's where our authentic self starts showing up, right? I mean, we're not here because we don't care.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with you. I agree with you. I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say we care.
Yeah.
As human beings, we care about our humankind. I mean, okay, maybe there's some jerks out there that don't, but I don't really know many. I think everybody humanly really does have a heart and wants to connect and help one another succeed.
Absolutely.
And it's having that dialogue, and it might be uncomfortable to go and say, hey, I get you're kind of caught up on this. Let's talk about it.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And having this conversation, not ignoring the pain of others, not stepping over it, not diminishing it, but actually creating space for that person to make them right, to validate their feelings. It may not be your experience, but it's having the humility to say, like, my experience is going to be different based on my, life situation, based on my background. And my experience is not the definitive of what exists in the world. And so allowing ourselves to be curious, that's one word.
Yeah.
Curiosity is one of them. And even me, I'm a Black woman, right? People are always asking me, and I work in the space of diversity. What do you think about this and this and this? And yes, I have my thoughts. And obviously I have an expertise and an academic background that will help me to give certain perspective. But the reality is that I can't speak about the lived experience of, Asian male or a Hispanic female or a white woman. I can't even speak for every Black person. Right. So, right. Because I mean, all of our experiences, I might be of a different socioeconomic background. That opens doors for me that other Black women don't get the same opportunities that I necessarily do. Right. There may be a Black woman that is from a non-English speaking country that has an additional challenge that she has to come over by learning English and everything else. So if we don't have that level of curiosity and compassion and openness, then the conversation absolutely gets stuck. And so it's really just opening the door to to your point earlier, and showing people that they care. And I want to highlight something that you said, because people feel like, because they're not, and we're going to talk about what leaders can do, right? Because there are 5 points we're going to get into in terms of what organizations can do. I would say if you're a leader in that position and the person in your organization is really upset that a position missed them or opportunities, like your job is to figure out what you can do to help that person get the better feedback that they need, and or open the doors for them to get them promoted and sponsor them. This is not just about you having empathy, because you actually have a seat at the table, right? But if you're obviously a peer of the employee, there's a difference. Like there's emotional support that a peer can provide, is what you're talking about. It's validating them. It's not minimizing their experience, or if you have contacts that this person doesn't have, maybe it's introducing them to people that you may not be in the position of power, but you can introduce them, maybe if you have those contacts, to people that are in positions of power. So you can do micro sponsoring from your I'm saying you as you as the plural.
We mean you.
Yeah, right. But you in the audience, you can open the door based on your own network. You could open, maybe you went to maybe you know a leader that this person doesn't know, you can make an introduction. So that's how you can provide support.
That's an excellent point. I was coming from a very linear thought process of just stopping to better understand. But that's an excellent point. You could be a resource for them that maybe you don't even know how you can support them, but understanding and getting curious about what they're looking for, you might be the key resource to their, their stand, you know what I mean? Their platform. Yeah.
You like, a lot of us underestimate the things that we can do. And so, yeah, like, it's looking at your own network. It's one of the key things I say. Or if you hear something on the street, like about their brand, right? Sometimes people don't, studies do show that women in particular and people of color don't tend to, and that's going to be one of my points, don't tend to get the feedback because people are scared. Like, most of the leaders statistically are men, right? And a lot of men won't give the honest and direct feedback. And if you go to Women in the Workplace report of 2020 and Black employees in the workplace, both reports that McKinsey released in 2020/2021, if you go back to those reports, they will both tell you, both of those studies tell you that that women and people of color don't get as transparent of feedback because there's fear that the managers are going to feel like they're being told that they're having bias or they're prejudiced or there's some sort of unfairness in their assessment, and so they hold it back. But the problem is they hold it back, but the perception is still there, and so the perception, the person doesn't know about it, it holds them back, and they don't have the ability to correct it. And so if you've heard, on the street in terms of feedback, and you're a peer to them, maybe it's like, say, look, there's a branding issue that you may have to work on because people are saying A, B, and C and helping them to get, the feedback they need. So there's not this blind spot in terms of what their development needs are. So.
Very, very true. Better understanding what people are, understanding what the gap is, and then stepping in to be the bridge for that gap.
Absolutely.
Bringing in the right resources, bringing in the right ideas, the right knowledge, the right opportunities can definitely bridge that gap.
Thank you so much. So I know what was the last one around the 5 things? Remind me what that question was.
Oh, so we are looking at what are the 5 keys that people can do instead of the current DEI programs that people have put in place, right? We all have that 3-inch binder sitting on our bookshelves as corporations that are responsible to affirmative action and AAP programs. And we pull it out once a year and we develop all the numbers, but we don't pull it really out again. And maybe once a quarter we check it, but we build our staffing and our talent succession. We look at it from that perspective. But is that really the roadmap? Or are there 5 other things that maybe we should be looking at?
Yeah, I love it. It's funny, before I go into the 5 things, people will often ask me, I think it's one of the points we said we were going to talk about too, how do you evaluate if your DEI program is working? I'm like, it's not rocket science. Is your look at your leadership team in particular, is it diverse or is it only a whole bunch of white men? Do we have women on the leadership team? Okay. Do we have people on color? I mean, the last census.
Everybody the same age.
Everybody the same. Like, talk about lack of diversity. It's like not just it's like older, white men. There's not even like an age diversity in terms of the highest levels in organizations. So yeah, looking at those numbers from a gender, ethnicity, neurodiversity, all this standpoint. I mean, the last Census Bureau said that in terms of the diverse population in the US, it's 1/3, right? So if your leadership team does not look like the communities in which they operate, if your number, I'm gonna put the number out, if your female leadership team is, if your female representation, is less than 40% on your senior leadership team, I'm not talking about just managers. A lot of organizations don't even have this number in their management level. I'm talking about senior leadership and C-suite, so VP and above. If those numbers are not at least 40% for women, like, you've got work to do. If your number for diverse people of color, I would say, in the US, that's what we go by. If it's not at least 30%, you've got work to do. So for me, how do you know if your DEI work program is working or not. As Tom Cruise said in Jerry Maguire, show me the money, show me your numbers. So
I always love, Keisha, when I'm working with an organization and they say, well, we're not required to keep an AAP. Okay, that may be true. You may not have the number of employees or a federal contract, so you may not have to worry about that. But that doesn't excuse not looking at having a very strong culture that has all the components.
yeah.
And I think that takes us into kind of your 5, but I know I want to turn it back to you, but I just, that always just makes me go, okay, but how happy are you with the culture? We work with a lot of small businesses and something's missing for them and they struggle to see what it is. And it's obviously leadership. It's obviously a broken culture. I had a classic moment in the last week or so where somebody said, it's a great culture. We have our MVVs on the wall and they really say something loud.
What does that even really mean? That's like a whole other language. All right.
You definitely do not dictate your culture, right? It's your map. It's a map.
Yeah, absolutely. So, so how do we get really serious around diversity in the workplace? You know, as leaders, from a leadership level, I can do a whole other discussion. What people at lower levels, we just talked about giving feedback, allowing them to get feedback, and giving and sponsoring at the junior levels. But the number one thing I look for with organizations, if people want to write down the 5 things, I'm going to get into those 5 things quickly and then take any questions. And if people are having questions as we go through, feel free to type in the chat because I'm going to look through the questions or comments that come through. But number 1, the CEO, I don't work with an organization if the CEO is not championing diversity, equity, and inclusion. The CEO has to drive it. The transformation has to be from the top of the organization down. And what I see with a lot of organizations, again, they get into this check the box mentality. You know, they assume that we have an employee resource group, the black employees group, Hispanic, the Asian American group, GLBTQ group, like we have those all in place. So, you know, everybody should be good. I'm like, no, actually, if the CEO, any business initiative that's not driven from the top down, including diversity, equity, inclusion, doesn't stick. And even if, and what I'll tell people, I'm going to call out some things that organizations do that they think it's enough. They think having a chief diversity officer is enough. It's not, because the reality is that a lot of chief diversity officers, they don't even report to the CEO. They report it to HR.
That's a huge investment, right? We're putting $100K into making sure that we have somebody that's controlling it.
Yeah, but and they bring them in, and then the person has no decision-making authority. They're just like this figurehead that, oh, like another checkbox. See, we have a chief diversity officer, but is the chief diversity officer empowered to actually influence the leadership team? No, the person who does that is the CEO himself. So unless that CDO is empowered, I call the chief diversity officer CDO to make it quick. Unless that CDO is empowered, then, you know, again, it's just this figurehead that really has no change in the organization. And so unless, you know, there are a lot of organizations that will reach out and they're like, Keisha, we want you to come in and look at our diversity strategy, help us to make our organization more inclusive, really have this at the top of our agenda. And my first question is, and if you call me, I'm going to ask you this, because my first question is your CEO bought in? Because if your CEO isn't bought in, if your CEO is not willing to spend time on this and put the dollars to it and really drive this change from that level, then it's a waste of time. I don't work with organizations unless we get the CEO bought in, I don't work with organizations because I've worked with organizations before that change has been driven from the bottom. But guess what? It didn't stick because ultimately, whatever initiatives are being driven from the top are going to take top priority. So that's the number one thing. The CEO has got to be bought in and drive it.
One thing that I've also noticed about that, Keisha, is your CEO might be bought in with $1, I'll throw a budget of X towards it. But if they don't realize the soft dollar, right? It's I'm willing to attend meetings. I'm willing to pull people off production lines for the training. I'm willing to pull my leadership team together on a regular basis and invest X amount of time away from productivity to focus on this. And $1 does not equal the other dollar. So you have to really look at, okay, I know you're willing to invest X amount of dollars to this, but how much time I pull the people away to actually hear the message and develop the strategy and be aware of what right looks like.
You hit the nail on the head. It's not just money, it's time as well. And recognizing that time invested now is time will be saved later on. We think about high performing teams, right, versus dysfunctional teams. You work in an environment that's a dysfunctional team, your productivity is actually going to be negatively impacted. When you work on diversity, when you work on inclusion, when you work on all the things, the leadership that we're talking about, that actually sets the stage for great high performing teams. And so that's what you want for your senior leadership team and for every team in your organization. Somebody asked, do I have links to the reports? We can drop links. It's going to be hard for me to drop the link right now, but I can email links out. But you could just go to women, you could literally type it in Google, women in the workplace, McKinsey, or Black in the workplace, McKinsey. And everybody has access. There's like 40, 50 pages that you can literally walk through, and it will tell you like how much work, how far we've come, and how much more work we have left to bring equity in the workplace. To your point earlier, one of the things that McKinsey said in their report is that if we continue at the pace that we are now in terms of getting to true equity in the workplace, it's going to take 95 years. I don't know if you've ever heard that number yet. 95 years, if we continue at our pace, for us to get to racial equity in this country, in the workplace. 95 years. I won't be alive in 95 years.
And that's just raciil. That's not anything else. That's just
I don't remember the number that was for gender, but it was pretty up there as well. But I just remember that number being 95, and I was just like, I won't be around for 95. So we've got to do something about that, right? To the second point, I know we are moving with time, and then jump in and tell me if there's anything you want to add, Susan, as well. But the second point here as well is that decision makers. So the first was the CEO driving it. The second is that decision makers at the executive level and below must sponsor opportunities for their people of color, for their women, for people that are not historically in these senior leadership positions. And we talked about this a little bit in your example, Susan, about what employees can do, peers can do, introducing them to their network. But obviously, senior leaders are the decision makers. They're the ones that are hiring people. They're the ones that are promoting people. They're the ones that literally are making these decisions. And so the studies show you can go back to McKinsey and all those other ones that I just talked about, is that the majority of leaders, we all know this, we don't have to look at the studies, are white male in organizations, C-suite leaders, right? Senior leadership teams are white male. And the challenge with that is people usually sponsor. When I say sponsor, it means open doors or tap people and say, you know what, this role has opened up. I want you to take the job, right? They typically really pull people in to these roles that are very similar to them. And similarities include gender, for sure. We talk about going on the golf course and decisions being made on the golf course. Those similarities include race, and it also includes the university that you went to, like whatever you have in common. This similarity is what makes you have this affinity toward this individual. So there is this concept, I call it the myth of meritocracy. We like to think, especially in the US, people get promoted because they're the most qualified. People get to the next level because we are fair and we look at your qualification. I'm like, no, the truth is, it's whoever the decision makers have visibility to. And they have visibility to the people that they're in proximity with. The people they're in proximity with tend to have similar backgrounds as them, because human beings, we have a thing called the similarity bias, right?
Mhm.
And so instead of saying, oh, like, because again, I can actually send another link. There is an article, a number of articles that came out called The Myth of Meritocracy. And it talks about the fact that the more an organization thinks they're, or say values this idea of meritocracy that I'm going to promote based on your qualifications, is the more likely that they're ridden with bias, because they're actually, the reason is they're not asking themselves the questions to challenge themselves and to remove blind spots. And because they assume the promotions are just being made on qualifications, they're not realizing, oh, actually the CEO is promoting the people that he knows, and the people that he knows looks like them. And so what I say is that if you really want to drive diversity, your senior leadership team has to move beyond just mentoring. We've all been part of those mentoring programs. I mentor more women, put them in your leadership program. No, like, that's nice, but I need you, when a position to open up, you know me well enough to say, you know what? Susan is qualified for this job. Keisha's qualified for this job. Put her in this role. Not Tommy Q or John Brown, right? It's really tapping and giving them, the women, the people of color, this visibility to the senior leaders, so the senior leaders can sponsor them and put their name in the hat and say, you know what, this role is opening up. It's a big role and I want you to take it because I know you and I know your work. The problem is that there's not enough visibility to talented, and nobody's saying to drop the bar, right? As a matter of fact, I'll go as far to say the bar is dropped already right now, because we're not looking at the full diverse of talent that's available. We're only looking at what the CEO knows now. So I see that people are dropping in the Black experience at work report and women in the workplace report. That's amazing. So it's all out there. I'm not making up any of these numbers. You guys can go back and you can look at that. So that was point number 2, sponsorship from the senior level. Any comments or questions on that, Susan?
No, let's make sure we get through your 5. Because like you said, we could talk for days on this, right?
Mm-hmm.
But we do need to be mindful of our time and make sure we get all 5 tips to everyone.
Yeah. And then the third one is going back to what you can do is tying compensation to the diversity metrics. You know, it's kind of linked to my next point. But when I say tying compensation to moving the needle on diversity metrics, it brings me an example. I was working with an organization that they, for many years in the New York tri-state area, New York City tri-state areas, and they could not move their diversity numbers in financial services. They couldn't move their numbers. And I'm like, oh, New York is literally the financial capital of the world. It's literally one of the most diverse cities, if not the most diverse city. I won't quote that because there could be another more diverse city in the world, but it's very diverse. And you're telling me you can't find diverse talent to shift those numbers in the New York area for this financial service company? Guess what? If you can't find those numbers, those numbers don't exist anywhere on the planet. I guarantee you. Because forget small town Ohio or Kansas, if you can't find it in New York City, right? Like, come on. Yeah. And so I like completely scoffed at it. And we had a leader that again was driving it from the top. And he was just like, I don't accept it when he took over. And literally within 12 months, guess what he did? He said, okay, guess what we're going to do to change to make sure your pay as senior lead, part of your incentive compensation, part of your bonuses, part of your compensation is going to be tied to your ability to move the numbers in your organization. And if a certain percentage of your organization by the end of this year, a certain percentage of your hires, because it was a growing organization, is not diverse, this is the amount that you will not be getting. This is the percentage of your pay is going to be docked. And all of a sudden, within 12 months, the numbers changed. All of a sudden, they found diverse people. And so I say all that to say, because a lot of people sometimes are not incentivized until they're held accountable. And it's funny because in the business world, there's accountability. We have performance metrics and KPIs that we grade people on, and we hold them to these numbers, but somehow we expect diversity numbers to shift when we're not putting in the same level of rigor and accountability and measurements and that is required to change the numbers. So when it works in the organizations I work with, leaders are courageous enough to tie it to some sort of performance metric in the organization. So that's the third point.
I love number 3. I'm just going to add that in there right now. So often we hold managers and leaders accountable to turnover numbers and, positive attrition, negative attrition, all of those elements from a dashboard perspective. Why not put that in there? That is brainiac.
It's like, okay, like, please. And then tied to that is I put your money where your mouth is. And it's a different metric because we do know that for organizations that are able to really create an inclusive culture, there needs to be equipping of their leadership team. Unconscious bias trainings is a popular one. I view that as the actual bare minimum. It's not enough to give training around that to transform a culture. But what are you doing to build a coaching culture which allows your organization to be more inclusive? What are you doing to equip the leaders to give clear, honest feedback? What are you doing to equip them to have courageous conversation? And so putting the money is really investing in programs that will help to shift the culture and equip the leadership team to create a safe space. And that requires training, which requires you to bring in organizations and consultants and contractors to help to equip the staff. And not only that, because obviously that's what Keen Alignment and myself, we do. So bringing in organizations such as us to help your organization with that. But then also when you talk about recruiting, like what kind of money are you invested in the recruiting effort to make sure that your organization exposed to diverse talent from Ivy League schools or from other organizations? And there are organizations out there that, will help in helping you change those numbers as well. So I say put your money where your mouth is. If you're not ready to actually invest in the money, like, I know of an organization that they were willing to spend $50,000 to upgrade their bar for event for their employee. And I'm like, they're not going to take that same $50,000 that you used to pay for alcohol at a Christmas party. But you are not going to take that same amount to pay a consulting firm to come in and to help you with equipping your leadership team. So it's about priorities. And the last one, since we are up on time, is really giving honest, actionable feedback to employees, women, and people of color, people of diverse backgrounds in particular. And the reason I say this, again, if you go back to any of the reports that was dropped in the from McKinsey in particular, that was dropped below, it says that women and people of color tend not to get the feedback that they need to get in order to get to that next level. So whether or not, there's something around how they're communicating, whether or not it's something about their attitude, whether or not it's actual lack of expertise and training that they need to get to bridge the gap between where they are and where they want to be professionally, they're not getting it. So they have these huge blind spots. They don't know what they need to work on, and then they don't get promoted. They don't get to go to that next level. And so one of the things leaders need to do, and this is why training is important, is give clear, actionable, honest feedback to these employees so that they can work on improving, because they can't improve something that they're not aware of. And so, for me, it's these 5 things that we just outlined as well. And your organization is really ready to do that work and really to dive in to what it takes to get to that next level from a DEI standpoint. Those are some of the steps that need to be taken. And Keen Alignment, we would love to work with you and to help your organization get to that next level professionally.
So very true, Keisha. Thank you so much for your insight. You know, it's one thing to invest in all of the beginning, but implementing and assessing your ROI is key. It's absolutely key.
And
don't
you know
look at
what's
it as a
funny?
binder.
Go ahead. Sorry, I keep on
I was gonna say,
interrupting. Go
don't
ahead.
look
Sorry.
at it as a binder, right?
Yeah,
Look at it as a
exactly.
program.
I look at it as a very inclusive program. And you know what's interesting when we talk about diversity, I think I said it before, but I really wanted to highlight this. They're on Glassdoor. I think most people are familiar with Glassdoor. They did back in 2021, I think it was either 2020 or 2021. They said that in the past, after George Floyd, before George Floyd, they did a number, like there was a top 19 of what employees are looking for to say that they're going to accept an offer from a company. And diversity and inclusion was, I think it was around 17. And they redid that assessment, and that number rose to number 7 out of 19. It went all the way up. I can't even, if they do it now, it's probably even higher, particularly within the Gen X, and younger millennials, not millennials that are over 40, but Gen X and younger millennials. The number was about 40% of them will not accept an offer from a company. These are top talent people that are not even people of color, right? Yeah. 40% of them are saying, like, if you don't have a clear diversity strategy and we can't see a path and a commitment to diversity because it's part of my value, I'm not going to come and work for your company. So yes, it's about attracting diverse talent, and it's about attracting even non-diverse. I had an organization that I was working with personally a number of years ago. This was before George Floyd. I can't imagine what people are saying now. And the guy, and he was white male, he was young, he was like early 20s, and he's like literally said he's resigning. I was shocked. I was so shocked because I'm a little bit older than him, a lot older than him, and obviously Black female. And he was like, yeah, I'm resigning because I want to be part of an organization that's diverse, and this organization is not diverse. And if I wanted to work for an organization that was not diverse, I wouldn't have left my small town in Ohio. It's literally what he said. And so I was like, what do you mean diverse? I was like, can you define that for me? I was just like, because you're like a white dude. And he was just like, no, I mean, Keisha, you know what diverse means? Like, people of color, women, like, I don't want to work with people that only look like me. I want to hear diverse backgrounds, experiences. Yeah. And this is why the younger generation, I mean, all of us should want this. But, when people think, oh, like, just make your people of color feel like, no, you're not actually going to attract top talent of any background, especially younger generation, if they don't see you have a clear, not just lip service, but a clear plan and a strategy and a commitment to this.
Yeah, I would say 70% or more of the candidates that I've spoken to in the last 6 months have been, I'm interested in this company because of their culture, not because of the job, the price, how long they've been in business, their competitors, because of their culture. Mm-hmm. So there's really something there. Keisha, it's been an absolute pleasure. I can't start my week off any better than with you. Thank you so much for your insight again. And if any of you would like to stay in contact with Keisha, feel free to link in with Keisha Winter with a Y.
KISHAWYNTER, because people actually spell my first name with an E. So both. It's a Y for Y and no E in Keisha. I'm on LinkedIn, Instagram, everywhere.
Feel free to connect with her on LinkedIn. Join our Keen Alignment Facebook pages on both LinkedIn and Facebook. And if you're interested in more information, you can also see this video again and other videos like it on YouTube. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you.
Thank you, Keisha.
Take care. Bye.